Human remains found inside suitcases in a very remote area of Palm Bay called the Compound.
The man arrested in this case isn't just accused of murder. He's accused of targeting sex offenders, cutting up their bodies, and saving microscope slides with their DNA. Lucas Jones had originally been brought in for disposing of human remains, but a new arrest warrant describes not just a horrible murder, but something allegedly targeted and planned, with evidence alleged to show future targets too. His arrest report accuses him of printing out a list of convicted sex offenders who lived near him and picking Coley Lee Daniel.
A 19-year-old sat at his laptop and printed out a list of registered sex offenders living near his home in Indialantic, Florida. He picked one, and what happened next would send shockwaves through every true crime community in the country. The victim was beaten to death with a baseball bat, the force so brutal it left a head-shaped dent in the bedroom tile. Then came the cleaver, the saw, the knife. The body was dismembered, stuffed into suitcases, and dumped in a desolate field. The only reason the remains were found at all: vultures circling overhead. But the most chilling detail wasn't the killing. It was what investigators found inside the home. Microscope slides, carefully prepared with the victim's blood, kept like trophies. A ritual straight out of Dexter, except this was real. His name is Lucas Sander Jones. He was 19 years old. What you're about to hear involves detailed descriptions of murder, dismemberment, and the sexual assault of a child. This is a real case involving real people. If any of that is difficult for you, now is the time to step away. For everyone else, viewer discretion is strongly advised. Indialantic sits on a narrow strip of Barrier Island on Florida's Space Coast. It is roughly 3 square miles of modest homes, salt air, and the kind of unhurried coastal rhythm that makes people forget to lock their doors. The Atlantic is close enough to hear on quiet nights. The town has no downtown to speak of, just residential blocks and the occasional strip of shops. About 3,000 people live here. Most of them know each other by sight, if not by name. 420 Watson Drive is a single-story house on one of those residential blocks. In March of 2026, it was home to Lucas Sander Jones. He had turned 19 the previous September. He didn't own a car. When he needed to drive, he borrowed the red Honda Accord hybrid that belonged to his girlfriend, Ms. High Burrows. By outward appearance, he was an unremarkable teenager, still living in his childhood home, still assembling the pieces of whatever his adult life was going to become. But there was a fracture in that life that matters. In August of 2023, Lucas's older brother Nicholas was killed in a motorcycle accident. He was 19, the same age Lucas would be when police say he committed murder. Nicholas had been a baseball player, an engineering student at the University of North Florida, a young man his family described as pure joy with a vivacious spirit. A truck making a U-turn pulled into the path of his motorcycle. Nicholas and his girlfriend both died. The Jones family buried him at Eastminster Presbyterian Church in Indialantic, less than 2 miles from the house on Watson Drive. What that loss did to Lucas, what it broke or bent or loosened inside him, is a question for psychologists and eventually for a jury. What the affidavit tells us is what he allegedly did next, and with whom and why. Coley Lee Daniel lived about a mile away on Shannon Avenue. He was 28 years old. He lived with his parents, and his name appeared on a list that anyone in the state of Florida could access with a few keystrokes. In January of 2017, when Daniel was 19, he was arrested in Indialantic for forcing himself on a 12-year-old boy. According to the arrest affidavit from that case, Daniel took the child behind a closed business on 6th Avenue, restrained him physically, and performed. The boy cried and ran home. When confronted by detectives, Daniel confessed on tape. He admitted knowing the victim was underage. He admitted knowing it was illegal. And he told police something that landed in the record like a stone dropped into still water. "I usually try to keep it legal," he said, when asked if he had sexual relations with other juveniles. Daniel pleaded guilty. He was convicted in 2018 of lewd or lascivious battery on a victim between 12 and 15. He was sentenced to 36 days of time served and placed on probation. He became a registered sex offender. In 2021, he failed to re-register, a violation that resulted in additional charges, but by the time of his death, he was back in compliance. He was in the system, monitored, visible. His photograph, his address, his conviction, all of it was public, searchable, mapped on the Florida Department of Law Enforcement offender database. That database, according to Burroughs, is exactly where Lucas Jones found him. She told detectives that in the weeks before March 20th, Jones had used his gray Apple laptop to print a list of registered sex offenders living near his home. Daniel was almost certainly on that list. His address was a short walk from Watson Drive, and on the evening of March 20th, Daniel arrived at Jones's front door. How the two met, what pretext brought Daniel to that house, what invitation or deception drew him inside, remains, as of this telling, unanswered. The affidavit does not explain it. Burroughs said she didn't know. What the surveillance cameras captured was this. At approximately 5:32 in the evening, Coley Lee Daniel pulled up to 420 Watson Drive in his white Hyundai Elantra. He got out. He walked inside. He was never seen alive again. Remember that detail, the car parked outside the house. It becomes important. Daniel had told his parents he would be home for dinner. When dinner passed and he didn't appear, they began to worry. They called. No answer. Hours stretched. By 9:45 that night, Daniel's parents had used the Find My iPhone feature on an iPad their son had left at home to trace his phone's location. The signal pointed to one address, 420 Watson Drive. They drove there. They knocked. Lucas Jones answered the door. He told them their son was inside, but that he wasn't going to let them in. He wouldn't produce Daniel. He wouldn't explain. He stood in the doorway of a house where, according to what he would later allegedly confess to his girlfriend, he had already killed and dismembered their child. Think about that for a moment. Two parents standing on a porch, asking to see their son, and the man who allegedly murdered him just hours earlier is standing in the doorframe telling them he's fine. He's inside, but you can't come in. They refused to leave. Jones called the police himself. Indialantic officers arrived, but Jones wouldn't let them in either. Officers searched the surrounding area, found no trace of Daniel, and eventually left. No contact was ever made with Daniel that evening. While the police were still outside, Ms. High Burroughs pulled up in her red Honda Accord. Jones had called her earlier that day. She told detectives she'd sensed something was wrong. He'd asked her to bring cleaning supplies. When she walked through the door, she entered what she later described as a crime scene already in progress. Black spray paint on the hallway walls, blood on the floor, blood in the tile grout, red stains on the jeans Jones was wearing. And then, according to Burroughs, he told her, "I killed somebody and cut him up." He identified the victim as Coley Lee. He said he'd used a baseball bat, that he'd dismembered the body with a cleaver, a saw, and a knife, that the remains were already packed, 2 black suitcases, 2 large Rubbermaid totes, and stored in the garage. Burroughs told police she never saw Daniel alive or dead. By the time she arrived, the body was in pieces and the pieces were in containers. She described one detail that investigators would later confirm. A tile outside Jones's bedroom was cracked and dented. The shape of the damage, she said, was consistent with a human head. What followed was not the behavior of someone racked by what they'd done. According to the affidavit, it was a cleanup operation, methodical, sustained, and ultimately inadequate. Jones asked Burroughs for help. She brought the cleaning supplies he'd requested. He had already begun scrubbing. Blood remained in the grout, in the carpet rugs, on the baseboards, on the wall outside his bedroom, but the bulk of it had been addressed before she arrived. He would later use a steam cleaner on the grouted tile. He spray-painted walls and baseboards to cover the stains. He poured Drano down the drains to destroy any biological matter that had washed into the plumbing. And then he made the slides. According to Burroughs, Jones placed samples of Coley Lee Daniels' blood or biological material onto microscope slides and showed them to her. Trophies, souvenirs, the kind of forensic keepsake that would be recognizable to anyone who has watched even a single season of the television show Dexter. in which a blood spatter analyst moonlights as a serial killer who targets criminals and preserves a single drop of each victim's blood on a glass slide. Whether Jones was consciously imitating the show, or whether the parallel is coincidence, the affidavit does not say. But Burroughs told police what she saw. The slides existed, and Jones was proud enough of them to display them. But the disposal was where the plan fell apart. Because for all the Drano and the steam cleaning and the trophies, Jones made fundamental errors that any competent investigator would exploit. At 2:29 in the morning on March 21st, just hours after the parents and police had come and gone, Jones took Burroughs' Honda and drove to a set of train tracks nearby. He dropped a bag containing unknown evidentiary material. Then he returned to the house. Later that morning, Indialantic police came back for a welfare check. Jones answered the door. Officers noted his appearance. Disheveled, red stains on his arms and chest, puffiness under his eyes, visible bruising and contusions on his shoulder and neck. But without probable cause to enter, and with no evidence of Daniel on the property, they left. As soon as they were gone, Jones loaded the containers. 2 Rubbermaid totes, at least 1 black suitcase, into the back seat of Burroughs' red Honda Accord. Flock safety cameras, the network of automated license plate readers that increasingly blanket Florida's roads, captured the car making 2 round trips to the compound, an area near 1574, Bombardier Boulevard in Palm Bay known for illegal dumping. 1 trip with Burroughs in the car. 1 solo. Between trips, Jones stopped at a Lowe's hardware store to buy paint. Then he drove back to the train tracks to retrieve the bag he'd dropped the night before. Then he drove everything to the compound and left the suitcases and totes in the tall grass. He also had Daniel's phone. Burroughs told police that at some point during the drives, Jones told her to turn off the phone's location services. He'd also placed an Apple AirTag inside Daniel's white Hyundai Elantra, the car still parked outside 420 Watson Drive, though the affidavit doesn't clarify whether this was done before or after the killing. On March 22nd, 2 days after Daniel was last seen alive, his parents reported him missing. And for 6 days, as far as the public knew, Coley Lee Daniel had simply vanished. But behind closed doors, Jones was working on Burroughs. According to her statement, he coached her on what to tell police if they came asking questions. He researched body language and techniques for concealing deception. He reminded her to go to work, to maintain her routines, to act as though everything was normal. She told detectives he would do this frequently. A steady, repetitive program of behavioral instruction designed to keep her calm and keep their story straight. It held for 8 days. Then the vultures found the suitcases. March 28th. 8 days since Daniel walked through Jones's front door. 8 days since his parents stood on that porch and were told their son was inside. 8 days since they last heard his voice. Someone reported an abandoned suitcase in the compound. That alone was unremarkable. The area collects junk the way low ground collects water. What was remarkable was the vultures. They had gathered above the tall grass with the patience of animals that know exactly what they found and are simply waiting for permission to begin. Palm Bay police officers arrived and located a black suitcase lying in the weeds. They unzipped it. Inside were partial human remains. And beside those remains, sealed in its branded cardboard, was an Amazon package addressed to Lucas Sander Jones at 420 Watson Drive, Indialantic, Florida. He had packed his own name alongside the body. Officers executed a search warrant at the Watson Drive home. They found what Burroughs had described and what Jones had failed to erase. Red droplets and blood spatter throughout the hallway, living room, kitchen, and garage, all of it presumptively positive for human blood. They seized several baseball bats, cleaning products, a shower drain extraction, and a physical folder, containing printed pages from the sex offender registry. Jones was arrested that same day, March 29th, and booked into the Brevard County Jail. The initial charges were narrow: tampering with or fabricating physical evidence, abuse of a dead human body, and transporting human remains in an unauthorized container. No murder charge. Not yet. He posted a $7,500 bond and walked out on March 30th. For approximately 48 hours, Lucas Sander Jones was a free man. But Ms. High Burroughs was unraveling. On March 30th, she contacted Palm Bay detectives and asked to speak again. This time, she said, she wanted to give them the true timeline of events. In her first statement, the one Jones had coached her to deliver, she had told police she'd seen Daniel alive in Jones's bed on March 20th, that Jones had been trying to wake him, that Daniel eventually left through the back door. It was the story Jones had scripted for her, rehearsed with her, reinforced through daily reminders about body language, about acting normal, about maintaining routines. She told detectives that Jones had researched techniques for concealing deception and had drilled her on how to behave if questioned. She also told them she was afraid, not because Jones had explicitly threatened her, he hadn't, not verbally, but his body language, his nonverbal cues, the things he did when he was angry, punching holes in walls, destroying property, made her believe she understood what he was capable of. She told detectives she feared she would become his next victim if she did not comply. And she added one more detail that speaks to the architecture of Jones's mind. He had told her that if he got caught, he planned to claim insanity. In her revised statement, Burroughs provided investigators with information they hadn't known. Details about the microscope slides. Details about the sequence of the cleanup. And this, at approximately 7 in the morning on March 21st, the morning after the killing, the morning police would arrive for that welfare check and find Jones disheveled and red-stained. Burroughs had searched Google on her phone for information about human decomposition. She did this, she said, because Jones wanted to know how much time he had before the smell became unmanageable. The affidavit notes that Burroughs described Jones as proud of the slides, proud of the hidden collection. When police executed a second search warrant at the Watson Drive home on April 1st, they recovered a wooden box containing a blood slide. That same day, April 1st, prosecutors filed an amended affidavit and upgraded the charge. Lucas Sander Jones was rearrested and charged with murder under Florida Statute 782.04, second-degree murder, the depraved mind provision. He was denied bond. He has remained in the Brevard County Jail since. On the Brevard County Medical Examiner's table, the remains confirmed what the affidavit alleged. The victim was positively identified as Coley Lee Daniel on March 31st. Manner of death, homicide. Cause of death, officially undetermined because not all of the body has been recovered. As of the most recent reporting, investigators have not located Daniel's torso or right arm. The Brevard County Sheriff's Office Aviation Unit has assisted Palm Bay Police in aerial searches of the compound. But the terrain is vast, overgrown, and strewn with debris. What the medical examiner did find was cataloged in clinical language that translates into something far worse than clinical. Multiple blunt force injuries to the head and extremities sustained prior to death. Pre-mortem defensive wounds on the upper extremities, meaning Daniel fought back or tried to before he died. And extensive post-mortem injuries described as experimental dismemberment and extreme mutilation consistent with significant force and intentional disfigurement. A drill bit injury on the remains matched a drill found at Jones's home. Experimental. That word sits in the autopsy report like a dropped anchor. It suggests not just dismemberment but exploration. Not just cutting but curiosity. It is, perhaps, the single most disturbing word in the entire case file. And then there was the courtroom. When Lucas Sander Jones appeared for his first hearing on the murder charge, cameras captured the moment that would ricochet across the internet. He stood in the jail courtroom, turned toward the camera, and raised his eyebrows. A quick, deliberate flash. Not a flinch. Not a nervous tick. A performance. A look that communicated with startling economy. I see you watching, and I am not afraid. The clip went viral. Comment sections fractured along predictable lines. Some viewers saw a psychopath. Others saw a folk hero. A teenager who did what the justice system, in their estimation, had failed to do. The comparisons to Dexter Morgan multiplied. The blood slides. The targeting of a convicted offender. The methodical cleanup. The youth of the killer. People grafted a television narrative onto a real killing and found that it fit closely enough to be satisfying, which is precisely the kind of satisfaction that should make you uneasy, because the Dexter comparison flatters the story into a shape it doesn't actually hold. In the television show, Dexter Morgan targets killers who have escaped prosecution, people the system has missed or released on technicalities. He operates under a code designed to ensure he only kills the guilty. He is fictional, written to be sympathetic, and performed by an actor calibrating every micro-expression for audience approval. Coley Lee Daniel was not a fugitive from justice. He had been arrested, prosecuted, and convicted. He pleaded guilty. He served his sentence. He registered as a sex offender. His name, face, and address were publicly available on a state database specifically designed to keep communities informed. The system had not failed in his case. It had, by its own standards, functioned. Whether those standards are adequate, whether a sentence of 36 days and probation for forcible on a 12-year-old constitutes justice, is a legitimate and urgent question. But it is a question for legislatures, for courts, for voters. It is not a question that a 19-year-old with a baseball bat and a list gets to answer with a skull fracture. And there are facts that complicate the vigilante narrative further. The affidavit states that Jones had planned prior acts and made preparations through not only tools but various weapons to carry out the act of murder. Burroughs told police that Jones wanted to kill sex offenders. Plural. Police have additional details about his motive, provided by Burroughs, that they are keeping confidential during the ongoing investigation. The printed list, the AirTag in Daniel's car, the research into deception. This was not an impulsive act of rage. According to the evidence as alleged, it was planned, prepared, and executed with forethought. The charge, as of now, is second-degree murder, murder with a depraved mind, without premeditation. But criminal defense attorney Rob Mandel, commenting on the case for Wesh, noted that prosecutors may seek an upgrade. And given the alleged planning, the printed target list, and the post-mortem mutilation, he would not be shocked, he said, if they pursued the death penalty based on the heinous nature of the crime. There is a piece of this story that doesn't fit neatly into any legal argument or internet debate, and it is the piece I keep returning to. On August 12, 2023, Nicholas Lee Jones, Lucas's older brother, his only sibling, was riding his motorcycle with his girlfriend when a truck making a U-turn pulled into their path. Both were killed. Nicholas was 19. He had just graduated from Melbourne Central Catholic High School, where he played baseball. He was studying mechanical engineering at the University of North Florida. His obituary described him as pure joy, a young man with an insatiable zest for life who loved God, country, family, and friends. The family held his memorial at Eastminster Presbyterian Church in Indialantic. Lucas was 16 when his brother died. Within 3 years, he would be arrested for murder at the same age his brother was when that truck pulled out. This does not excuse anything. It does not mitigate the baseball bat or the cleaver or the slides in the wooden box. But it may explain, not justify, explain some fraction of the trajectory. Grief is not an alibi, but unmetabolized grief in a teenage boy, mixed with whatever else was already present or absent in his psychology, can become a reagent that accelerates reactions that might otherwise have never occurred. A defense attorney will certainly argue this. A jury will have to decide how much weight to give it. What the jury will not be able to avoid is the physical reality of what happened in that house on Watson Drive. A 28-year-old man walked through a door expecting, what? A conversation? A transaction? A trap he didn't recognize? We still don't know. And he was beaten to death with a bat, his skull striking the tile hard enough to leave a head-shaped dent, his arms rising in defense before they were overwhelmed, and then, after he was dead, his body was taken apart with tools and packed into luggage, and his blood was collected and preserved and displayed as a trophy by a teenager who was proud of what he'd done. That is not justice. Justice has rules and oversight and the possibility of error correction. What happened on Watson Drive was a killing, premeditated or not, righteous or not, understandable or not, committed by one citizen against another, with no authority, no trial, no appeal, and no restraint. Coley Lee Daniel committed a terrible crime against a child. That fact is in the record, and it is unambiguous. He confessed to it himself on tape, in language that revealed not remorse but calculation. I usually try to keep it legal. He served a sentence that many people reasonably consider obscenely lenient. He was someone's nightmare. He was also someone's son. His parents drove to that house on Watson Drive looking for him. They stood on the porch and asked to see him. They were told he was inside. They believed it. They went home and they waited, and 2 days later they reported him missing, and 8 days after that, vultures led strangers to what was left of him in a field. There is no version of this story where everyone is whole at the end. There is a 12-year-old boy who was violated in 2017 and who carries that. There are Daniel's parents, who buried pieces of their son. There is Ms. High Burrows, who walked into a house full of blood and spent the next 10 days trapped in a lie, afraid she'd be killed if she told the truth. There is the Jones family, who lost one son to a truck that didn't look twice and may lose another to a prison cell for the rest of his life. There is a community in Indialantic that now knows its quiet streets contained both a convicted predator and, allegedly, a killer in formation, living a mile apart. And there is a question the internet will debate and the courts will adjudicate, but that no one will fully resolve. What do you do with a monster who kills a monster? Do you call it justice? Do you call it murder? Do you call it both and sit with the discomfort of that? The law has an answer. Florida Statute 782.04 has an answer. The jury, when this case reaches trial, will have an answer. But the vultures circling over that suitcase in the tall grass of the compound, they didn't have an opinion about any of it. They were just following the smell. And what they found, stripped of every argument and every headline and every Dexter comparison, was the same thing it always is. A body, in pieces, left in a field by someone who thought he had the right.